Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can hear us okay. My name's Mel. I'm the General Manager for Career Life Transitions. Before Peter starts the presentation, I'll just run through some housekeeping with you, as we'll have quite a few people coming and going throughout the presentation. If you can please keep your microphones muted and your videos off for now. If you do have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So I'll now pass you on to Peter James, Career Life Transitions Director, who'll run through the presentation with you.
Thanks, Mel. Hi, everybody. Great to see you all online this afternoon. If you're all in Perth, you're probably looking at that grey, rainy day outside. So we're really happy to present to you about guided facilitation, and it's something that we provide as a service to our clients. But for a little bit background of myself, when I got into organisation development initially, I actually worked for a company for a couple of years, and all we did was guided facilitation. So we did guided facilitations from 1 hour to 1 week, basically all around the world, for organisations that were looking for someone to help them work through some form of issue or problem that they were struggling with in their own business. So in this session, we will provide you with an understanding of what guided facilitation is. And I guess it's different to chairing a meeting, it's different to teaching, it's different to presenting. It has a particular place and a particular role, and if done well, it really adds a lot of value, an enormous amount of value to the team and to the business. We'll provide you create an understanding for you of why guided facilitation is important in organisations. We'll provide you with some knowledge about how and when to use guided facilitation, because it isn't for everything. For example, I mean, someone may say to me, or may be thinking to yourself, well, why aren't we running a guided facilitation session for this? Why aren't I facilitating this session online? And as we go through, we'll answer that question, but it's not really suitable if we go back and have a look at what guided facilitation really is. And you will go away and we'll provide you with the templates and a copy of the slides and a copy of the videos we go through, which will provide you with some basic how-to tools. So why do I use guided facilitation? Well, basically when a group needs to achieve something together, so it's very, very much a group intervention. We use it a lot. It's not for when you bring an expert in who is teaching everybody something. What it is when you have a group of people, they may have differing views about things, they may have differing agendas about things. When I want to bring that together, and I know the answer sits within the team, it doesn't sit within the individual coming in and presenting it. It's where dialogue will solve a problem, where people have a safe environment in which they can share their ideas, have robust conversations, and understand that that's in a controlled environment where their opinion and their interaction is accepted. Where organisations, companies want to create something new, like a new process, a new way of going about things differently. When there's time issues and time pressures to come up with a solution to a particular problem, guided facilitation is very important. Or where shared learning and shared understanding and coming to an agreed commitment is important at the end of the meeting. Now, few of you have already submitted some questions. If I haven't answered these questions through the presentation, then I've actually downloaded them and listed them at the back, and we'll go through and chat through those at the end of it. So here are just some things I can use guided facilitation for. I won't read the cartoons out for you. They're Larson cartoons. I particularly enjoy these. But you can use it for project planning, where it's just not thrown together. You can use it for team alignment, where you may have either different companies, different groups, different silos in your business coming together, and you're looking to get alignment from that. You can use it for your business planning. You can use it for some sophisticated decision making that you need to make about the direction of your organisation or the team. And we used it a lot for business process re-engineering and redesign. So there's a little cartoon on why the Neanderthals became extinct. So what is guided facilitation? Well, the textbook says a process in which a person is accepted by all members of a group, substantively neutral, and has no decision-making authority, intervenes to help the group improve the way it identifies and solves problems. And then the group makes decisions in order to increase the group's effectiveness. So you notice the thing about that is, and I guess that's where, as an outside facilitator, I come into organisations, because I'm neutral, generally accepted by the members, and I have no decision-making authority. And some of your questions are coming in about, well, how do I do that in my company? And if you're working in your company and have a contentious issue which you're having to facilitate that meeting on, then someone in that group will think you have an agenda. And I guess as a professional facilitator, I really draw the line. If I'm brought into a company and asked to drive an agenda by the business, then that's when I walk away from that, because it will not work. That's not the way. If you want that, then be a manager, turn into a management activity, and make the hard decisions and cop the flack. Trying to get a group of people on board on something that they don't agree on because that's your agenda does not work when you're trying to facilitate a group. So facilitators are agents of change who work on helping individuals, groups and organisations develop and improve their performance. So I said at the beginning, I mean, this is a presentation. I wouldn't even actually probably put it in the training environment. We only have half an hour to 45 minutes to cover the subject. So I am very, very heavily in presentation mode. And you can see the left there in training, I'm presenting ideas, I'm developing a level of competency in you. So I would be setting up programs and activities of which you can test. So I'll give you a little bit of knowledge, let you have a discussion, let you have a try at performing that, and then coming back and debriefing that for continuous improvement. So that is a teaching method. So that's what I would do in a classroom or whatever. A presentation, which is pretty much what, because of time and because of the numbers of people that are on the Zoom presentation, I'm presenting this. So you're getting my view on it, you're seeing my slides, you're hearing me talk about it, you're not really engaging while I'm doing the presentation. I'll certainly be asking some questions. I'm not setting exercises for you. I'm not asking you to discuss with each other the things I'm presenting. I'm saying, here it is for you in its entirety. And more than happy for you to catch up at a later stage to debrief some bits on it. But that pretty much, it's not a training session per se. It's really a presentation to give you a background on my view of what facilitation is from 25 years experience. So therefore, what is it? So facilitation is where participants are members of the team with a purpose to improve or change some kind of process, make a decision. The objectives are process outcome based, okay? So they're outcome based. An agenda is used to structure the meeting for effectiveness, but the agenda looks at the structure. It doesn't necessarily look at the content. The content is driven by the participants. Questions and activities are used to develop involvement and engagement. They're not used to develop in terms of a learning activity. So in other words, as a facilitator, I'm not necessarily teaching you something and then developing that for you, but I am setting up questions and activities that encourage you to think about a problem or a situation differently. Team member inputs and ideas are generally recorded. The facilitator assists members to use tools for team problem solving. The facilitator manages a meeting structure. Teams, typically you don't want to go much more than about 12 people in a facilitated group, because everyone then doesn't feel like they're having their say. I have been involved in facilitated sessions of up to 100 people, and that usually involves multiple facilitators and over a couple of days. And outcomes will usually involve a larger group, so they have an impact on the larger organisation. Now I've just put in here, these are the 10 musts that interfere with good facilitation. So these are things you probably want to stay clear of. And certainly, you know, when I think of when I started my journey of facilitation some 25, 30 years ago, the real big errors I made And the first one being the sole source of wisdom. So as you can probably hear from this presentation, I like the sound of my own voice, and I like to tell people what I know. I guess that's where I see my calling in terms of teaching, and what I had to teach myself as a facilitator is you don't have all the answers to that. I must be in control of the group at all times? No. If the group wants to head in a certain direction, or there's a certain issue or problem there, you're going to have to go with that, because as a facilitator, I'm coordinating the activities of the group. I'm not controlling the activities of the group. I need to be aware of everything that goes on in the group. Well, not necessarily. There are things that are going on there in the group that belong and are owned by the group. All I'm trying to do is coordinate those activities. I must be liked at times by the group. Well, no, my job isn't to be liked, nor is it to be disliked, but it is there to ask the hard questions, and sometimes it is there to make a call. I remember I was asked to facilitate quite a senior meeting with a large mining company in their head offices in there, and I knew it was a contentious issue. And as a facilitator, I started the meeting, and about 15-20 minutes into the meeting, I could see very, very clearly that the enormous elephant in the middle of the room, no one was going to touch it with a barge pole. So I called that, and that ruffled some feathers, but it completely changed the meeting, and it started to have the conversation they needed to be having rather than avoiding the conversation they needed to be having. So I wasn't particularly popular at the time, but I was congratulated for raising the issue, which was the main thing they needed to cover off on. I always must maintain a professional facade. Well, not really. We have trying to have fun with the group. Part of being a facilitator is having fun and adding energy to that group. I must pressure participants to self-disclose. Well, no. Anything is done challenged by choice. Anything participation by choice, and it's up to the group. I'm trying to set up an environment where the group feels safe, where the group creates a trust, the group wants to share, and the group should be interacting and calling on people to participate. But if someone doesn't want to participate, it's not up to me to make sure that happens. I must ensure that great attention is paid to the relationship between participants, relationship issues, only if that is disrupting it. And the only time I've really had that, when I've had two people who are clearly don't like each other and are almost like maliciously interacting in that group, where I've actually called a halt to that, taken those two people aside and with their manager and put that to bed so we could continue with the conversation, because ostensibly the facilitation is about driving results within a time frame. So it is about getting as much involvement and as much valuable information in there and as much rich and trusting communication as possible in the time you have available. Facilitation in a group must be all work and no play. No, sometimes some of the greatest breakthroughs are playing games, challenging each other, relaxing, where people have let their guard down and they're feeling safe in an environment, they're feeling safe that they can disclose their fears or concerns. And I must always get the balance right between presenting structured activities and group discussions, right? Once again, the group, I'm not here to teach the group, and I'm not here to present to the group. I'm here to manage and facilitate the group and help the group come to conclusions. And I do that with a lot of upwork preparation. I do that by taking notice of what's going on while the facilitation is going on. I do that by asking appropriate questions, and I do that by knowing when to let something go, when to call it up, and I guess move in a different direction. So I'm continually aware where things are getting stuck, where contentious issues may come up, where something is adding value. And I've gone in. Another example, I went in, and it was actually with the police department, where I went in with one agenda, and it was a very, very senior group of police officers, and the information they'd had on the project, they didn't particularly agree with. So it was my first interaction with them. And on my presentation, I remember clearly a senior inspector getting up from the back of the room, pretty much saying to me, "You are not heading down the track we want this meeting to go. We want this meeting to be about where we see the issues and where we see areas for improvement of what you think you might be trying to sell to us." And on the fly, we had to turn that whole meeting around almost 180 degrees and head off in another direction. that met the needs of the group. Because if I'd gone down the track of the agenda that I'd set, that group of people would have got up and walked out. As it was, they were heard, they contributed, they came to some conclusions, and they provided some commitment. So the session, although it wasn't as per the agenda, was extremely successful. So I've spoken a little bit about the role of the facilitator in the meeting, and that this is, I guess, the key of what the facilitator needs to be, and the key learning from me from moving from a teacher to a presenter to a facilitator, where I'm coming in and I'm completely neutral. And regardless of the stories I hear and the agendas that I may have collected around in the meetings prior to the facilitated meeting, I need to go in there and keep a very, very open mind. Because if I go in there with a group and I'm seen to be chasing one agenda or another agenda, and people in the group pick that up, then I'll have immediately supporters, and I'll have people that are basically now against me. And it makes it very, very hard to facilitate that group if people think that you have your own agenda. So remaining neutral is very, very important, which means giving everything equal weight. So I'm also trying to serve as a positive force in the group. When things start to bog down, if people are getting tired, if I see there's time for a break, if I see there's an opportunity to mix things up, get people moving around, doing those kind of things, I'm kind of doing a little bit of a monitoring of the health of that group while I'm facilitating it. So I'm always trying to be upbeat. I ask interesting questions. I ask provocative questions. I play the devil's advocate. I do the what ifs and things like that to I guess, encourage people to think outside the box. I protect individuals from their ideas from attack. So as I say, being neutral, if someone comes up with something controversial, then we can hold people to account if they decide they want to take that agenda on in the form of attack. And sometimes if you have a little bit of a contentious group, you can actually pre-set up little activities and games and what have you to ensure, if you think it's going to go that way, then ensure that it doesn't. So, I mean, one of the things we used to do in the old days, we had a couple of plastic dinosaurs. So we went in for a meeting, and the meeting was about the future and about creative and new thinking. We had a little rule in there. If you came up with a dinosaur thinking and something, in other words, something we'd done before, you criticised something before, then we would hand that dinosaur, and you were stuck with that dinosaur until you caught someone else doing something that drew the group back into the past. And that became a little competitive game for the people in there. Anyone that criticises someone else buys the first drinks for the at the end of the session. Something like that, where you're now actually setting what you may predict is going to be an issue. Now you're setting up solutions to that prior to going into the meeting. So if people are attacked, there are certainly, you would be calling it in terms of what you see happening and the impact it has on the individual and the group, and moving forward on that. You prepare and follow an agenda, and I probably spend as much time preparing an agenda for a meeting as I do actually running that meeting. So if we have a one-day facilitated session, I would at least spend a day preparing that agenda to make sure that it meets the needs, asks the right questions. You need to keep members focused by moving around, challenging people, inviting them to contribute, calling out, I guess, behaviours that you're seeing in the group. I never evaluate people's ideas. I never say, that's a great idea, or that's not a good idea, or, I never put myself in a situation where I'm the one that is a gatekeeper of what comes onto the table. I perform any introductions at the beginning of the session, so that may be if people don't know each other, little icebreakers and things like that. So I'm trying to set up a situation as quickly as possible, especially with people who may not be close in contact with each other, where they feel trusted and comfortable to disclose, basically, and move from guarded conversation to trusting dialogue. And I'm always trying to encourage participation from people. So, I mean, one of the more interesting situations I had with, which really made sure I had to play this role, was working with one of the oil and gas companies, where they had a contentious process and a particular oil. It was a non-oil based drilling fluid and its impact on the environment. So basically I was facilitating a group. Half the group were PhDs from the oil and gas company. The other half were PhDs from CSIRO, actually. So there's about 8 people in the group. At the end of the day, they needed a decision on that. So you could imagine I'm with a group of people who are far superior in intellect, far more knowledgeable. I mean, I virtually know nothing about the environmental impacts on non-oil-based drilling fluids. So, and everybody had an opinion. Everyone had a strong opinion. People had opposing opinions. So it could have been a very, very contentious meeting if it wasn't facilitated. People would have gone to the polar opposite sides. And so bringing that group together and finding the common points, finding the discussions, finding where they could agree on things, where further research may have been required, things like that, just helped to move that group on. So at the end of the day, they had something really solid to work on and some real commitments from a couple of independent organisations that generally their agendas may be opposed to each other, although their intent was the same. So while you're facilitating, the 4 skills that I tend to try and roll out all the time is I'm observing non-verbal communications. If I find someone talking too much and everyone starts folding their hands, I'm looking to see who's checking out. I'm looking to see whether people are agreeing with what's being said, whether they're frowning, they're smiling, they're nodding, things like that. I'm just kind of getting a sense as I'm going through the facilitation as to where people stand on various issues, because I need to be very, very aware. As a facilitator, it's a very, very tiring and exhausting session, because you're constantly learning, you're constantly monitoring, you're constantly trying to build what's going on in your own head so that you're able to contribute and add value, not in terms of contact, but in terms of the process. Pay attention and listen for what's being said and the intent of what's being said, because sometimes people aren't particularly clear in what they say, but their intentions may be. And paraphrasing people in a way that may assist them getting their point across really adds value, and it also clarifies things for the rest of the group. And that's the next one, paraphrasing and clarifying for understanding. Did everyone understand? Are we on the same page? Is that a contentious issue? Is there something about that statement that we agree with or don't agree with? And I'm constantly practicing questioning techniques. And a lot of that is really just trying to get the best out of that group and get some clarification, because I guess if I'm not seeing the sequence, or I'm not seeing the link between this and that, then I'm reasonably confident maybe that there are a couple of people in the room who are also in the same boat as myself. So if I'm not seeing the logic, the sequence, the connectivity and everything, regardless of what the subject matter is, then I may question for clarification, and I may even make it easier for the group, saying, look, I'd just re-explain it for me, even though I know that I'm actually asking for maybe several other members in the group. So you're responsible to develop an agreement with the team leader regarding responsibilities. Help the team establish rules and working together. So these are the things that when you're really running the facilitation, a lot of it is what you do up front and the planning you do for that session. So that agreement with the team leader, who's going to do what in terms of that session. If it's a team or whoever's coordinating or whoever's organising it, you may have someone come in and present. You may have different groups in there present their point of view. You may have different people in there who may be more responsible to make the outcomes happen than other people. So understanding the dynamics of the group is quite important. I certainly notice a lot of times when I'm facilitating a level of group and the managing director or the general manager walks into it, you very, very, very quickly see the conversation change. So sometimes it may even be, look, you're really welcome to come in and stick your head in, but please come in, say hello and leave, or come in and present and leave. If you want to sit in on the conversation, then just be aware that you are going to have a major impact on it. It's very, very important that you establish rules moving forward. And a few of your questions are, how do I control the group? How do I get this result? How do I drive them to this particular area? Well, the way you do that, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, but the way you do that is actually establish the rules before you start. So if you have a group, especially groups of people from different organizations and what have you, you need to sit down there and say, right, if we are going to have this conversation today, what are our ground rules? How do we want to interact with each other? So you're almost like pre-setting the values and culture of that rule, and then you ask the team to call themselves to account. Because once I agree that that's the way I'm going to work in the group, it's very, very hard to then say, well, no, I've changed my mind. I want to do something different. Now, clarifying and defining any problems that you see going through and establishing realistic goals. I mean, I guess one of the challenging things about, especially in senior management teams, is they want to solve the world's problems. And I've left some facilitator meetings after a day in the early days where they've come up with 10 different things they want to try and solve. Well, my experience says that that doesn't really work. If you've got really busy managers who pull together, you want them to be trying to solve 2 or 3 things, not 10 things, unless you're setting up subgroups and setting the subgroups away. So set some realistic goals as to where you want to go with the session, because if you've got 1 hour or 4 hours or 1 week and that's to solve the problems of the world, I don't know that you're going to be able to achieve that. Recognizing blockers, maintaining focus and motivation, understanding, implementing different learning styles. So some people need to write things down, some people need to talk about them, some people need to take time to read about them. If you're introducing information or people are introducing it as part of the session, you want to provide time for people to absorb that information. Keeping the team motivated, on track, ensuring decisions made to either team are group decisions. In other words, it's consensus. And that's the other thing. If you have 2 totally opposing groups and you're trying to bring that together, then that becomes a problem solving. It becomes a mediation type facilitator meeting where you are now starting on what we agree on, what we do, and start to work through those things so that at the end of it, you come up with a balanced commitment from people where people can say, well, I don't agree with everything that's on there, but I am committed to the result. Because no matter what happens through there, if you have people with different views, you've got to work your way through that so that the things that are important are discussed, but as an end result of that, the people leave that meeting with a commitment to do that. That you identify problematic behaviour or dynamics in the group that may prevent people from learning new and different ways of moving forward. And as I say, playing little games, pre-setting the behaviour, pre-setting the culture and values in that group are one of the ways that you can do that and deal with that. But as I say, if you have specific malicious behaviour in the group, you may even have to call a timeout and get those 2 people together. As I say, that hasn't happened very often for me. I think a lot of the time when I have people having robust conversations, it's usually because they're passionate about the subject and they really are genuinely trying to do the best thing by the company. So working through that and accepting that it's a robust conversation and having a constructive process of going through and having those discussions will get you an excellent result, because most people don't go into these sessions with a malicious intent. As I said to you before, raising undisclosed issues or hidden conflicts is important. If I see the elephant in the room or I see people tiptoeing around something that's obvious to me, then I would automatically assume that's obvious to everyone else as well. So I may just completely raise that. And as a neutral person invited from outside that has no idea of the politics or the games that may be played on there, I'm the absolute perfect person to be the bunny to say, hang on everybody, there's an elephant in the room. I don't know if everyone else will see it, but I see we're not going to move forward unless we discuss that and hear the gasp from the room and then move forward from there. Challenge, summarise and explore ideas with the group, playing the devil's advocate and providing feedback in the form of some kind of outputs document at the end of it. Because, I mean, the thing about a facilitated meeting is you're getting a group together, you own a process, they have all the information, you're trying to bring them together so at the end of the day, they have achieved the goals they set at the beginning of the session they're in agreement, they provide a commitment, and they have an agreed path forward next steps. That's important in a facilitated meeting. So some of the tools, I won't go and spend a lot of time on this, but there's problem-solving models, there's nominal group techniques, there's brainstorming, six thinking hats, consensus decision thinking, problem-solving modes, flow charting, DISC, parking lot, SWOT analysis, all those kind of things, all a whole range of tools that you can find online that will add value to that particular aspect of it. So if I'm doing a team building exercise, for example, I might spend the first half hour doing DISC. So while they're having fun and interacting with each other, they are getting an education that everyone doesn't see the world the same way they see it. So as we move through that facilitated session, the DISC becomes an internal conversation where people are calling each other to account on their approach to the way they're thinking and their behaviours in the group, as an example. So real quick kind of walk through how I would use guided facilitation. So I really do need to set the scene. And as I said to you before, I have at one stage, I do remember working on quite a large complex project and getting grabbed by the CEO of that project and thrown into a room with procurement and a couple of vendors with the instructions, Pete, the conversation is going nowhere. I need you to get in there and get it sorted out so we have a conclusion by 1 o'clock today. That's when I didn't have a lot of chance to go in and prepare. But generally speaking, it's what you set up prior to the meeting that answers a lot of the problems that you may find you're having in a meeting if you're just having a meeting where you have contentious issues, where you have people not agreeing with each other, you have people that are malicious in that group. These are the kind of things I try and set up prior to the meeting. I try and get some information about the group, about the individuals in the group, what the different schools of thought may be, where people are coming from, everything I can possibly try and find out. And the key thing about it is, what do you want at the end of it? What are the goals and the objectives? Whether it's problem solving, whether it's decision making, whether it's process redesign, at the end of the day, what is it you want to see as a result of that? Next, I take care of the logistics, booking the room, board, the room layout, overhead projector, flip charts, marking pens, all those kind of things, so that when we start that day, and I usually get to a meeting half an hour to an hour before to set it all up to make sure everything is running smoothly for that. If you're doing activities, you have those activities ready with you to ready to go. Meeting preparation is, I tend to create a meeting workbook if necessary, or at least an agenda where we're going through things. But it's establishing the flow of the workshop. Poor flow will have a massive negative effect. Asking the wrong questions will close down groups rather than open up groups. Asking questions that are out of sequence creates confusion in people. Asking questions that aren't very clear create confusions. You end up with different answers, and that can bring things undone. Be certain about what you are going to do to achieve the objectives, and that's why that agenda is important. The group needs to contribute to the meeting, not the facilitator. I will ask the questions, I will set the activities and what have you, but the contribution is from the people that are attending. I establish exercises to encourage participation and relax people, so that I'm trying to create that dialogue, that trusted interaction, and that I ensure I've got a framework for sharing that information and knowledge moving forward, either with the group, between the group, or with the wider group. A lot of times at the end of a facilitated session, we may spend 5 minutes saying, how are you going to go to the rest of the company and tell them this is what we're going to be doing differently, or go back to your team and say, this is what we've decided moving forward, because it sits with the group unless you've got a method of sharing it. While I'm running the meeting, and we've spoken about that a few times, run the meeting as per the agenda. I use the appropriate skills. The participants tend to record that, or I use flip charts paper to record that information, and I work with the group to achieve those objectives. I gather the outputs, information, prepare output documents at the end of it, so everyone's clear what's going on, and at the end of it, I tend to review what happened at the facilitated meeting. What went well, what could have been done differently, what could have been done better, was everyone engaged, did it achieve the goals and objectives? So I'm always going back and rechecking. So this is a sample agenda. This is a live agenda. I've actually run this workshop. on team building. So you can see from the research we've done, workshop designed to allow ABC management team of the IT department to resolve existing team-related problems. In other words, the team wasn't working well together. Specific objectives: improve the existing level of teamwork, identify, prioritize, and resolve existing team issues. This isn't about the work they're doing. This is now about the way they're working together. So I do my introductions and welcomes and what have you to the group and what have you. And you see the next thing I do is set up expectations and ground rules. So I go around the group and I say, what are your expectations of today? So I'm getting already a bit of a sense of where people are coming from. And I have people who've got no expectations to, I'm expecting it to be a waste of time, to I'm really expecting that we're going to get something good out of it. But the key thing I move from there is I set up the ground rules. So I've got a bit of an idea as to where people are coming from. And now I say, well, let us set the rules for how we want to interact together. And that those ground rules is pretty much setting the values. And I may, as I said to you before, I may even set, if I think it's going to be contentious, I may even set rewards and censures within the group to call the group out and allow them and give the group permission to call each other to account. I may even ask the group for permission. I may say to them, if we go contentious or if you guys start arguing with each other, I want your permission to stop that activity. And I tend to get that permission moving forward. So you can really start to manage the way the group interacts without controlling the information that's passing through there. Now, this particular one, the group interviewed reviewed the interview data. We had a section 1 was the high performance team, which talked about how a team works together, and it was really working through asking that team how it works together and what are the issues that are impacting it, and allowing people to have those open conversations. Then we had a look at the individuals, key ways to improve the individual team performance. What are the things that you can do? So this is what is the issue with the team as a whole. Here is some of the contentious things that come in from the individuals of the team. And then we go back and say, all right, how do we pull all this together? What are the things we need to put in place to move forward? What is a process map? What are the needs of each of the other to move forward? And sometimes it may be going back to a disc profiling. I need you to interact with me a different way. Sometimes we play a little activity that talks about requests and promises. When you ask me a question or you want some information, what I request of you is enough time to provide that. Don't come to me with an emergency. And if you do, I need this and this and this to happen. There are different ways in which I can interact. Now, we tend to, at that stage, getting towards the end of that session, coming up with, well, who's going to do what, by who, who's going to lead it, and by when is that going to happen, and really trying to set up some next steps and commitments as a result of that. And then their evaluation and close. So that's very, very quick walkthrough of a little team building. And this was a one-day session. And at the end of it, I mean, the team, they're not a group of people that came together who didn't want to work together. They're a group of people that came together that had maybe goals where they didn't understand where they were in conflict. They had personalities where they didn't understand where they were in conflict. And people tend to look at misunderstanding as malicious by another person. If someone doesn't agree with me, I tend to, people tend to go, well, that's a malicious activity. Whereas I tend to look at it these days and say, okay, if we're not in agreement, why? Where is the lack of understanding there? Where is the lack of me appreciating where you're coming from or you're not appreciating where I'm coming from? Now, use of breaks, activities and challenges due to facilitated meetings. I use these things to, when the energy has dropped down, where I want the smaller group to break into, rather than having a whole group discussion, where we need something to energize a group, where we have something where we introduce a group, where I have a particular activity where I want someone or a group to learn a particular skill through either problem solving or something like that. I might have an activity or a challenge or a group break where I might even set up something that would mirror a workplace activity where they have a challenge. It may be problem solving, communication skills, things like that. So sometimes these, especially when you want to have some fun with a group, throwing these things in can have a fun component, but a very, very serious connection to their workplace. So you have to ask yourself, what meetings have you attended lately that would have achieved a better result had it been facilitated by a neutral outside person? And there's a whole list of these are the type of, as a neutral professional facilitator, these are the types of meetings that I attend on behalf of companies, as I said to you, anything from an hour up to a week, where we are driven to get a result that we can present back to management, to the team, where we have commitment and we have a walk forward, a way forward. Now, role play, I've just put those in there. You might play with that. Obviously, we don't have time for role plays now, just keeping an eye on the time. But you may get together with your friends or your team or what have you and say, well, let me just practice with some facilitation. So here are just some examples of some role play topics that you could look at. Okay. So we're coming to the close now. Many of you kindly submitted some questions prior to the session. Now, I'm just going to go through those. This is the last slide. So we're just pretty much on time. Then Mel will jump in and see if there's any final questions you might have or anything you've actually presented. So I have certain meeting parameters that I put in place when facilitating. My concern is during a change management process, how do I ensure everyone gets heard without going to the dreaded money trail, especially if they hold a lot of value and connection with the team, rather than having a flesh things out later, one-on-one sessions, for instance. So I guess my view on that is although you may have many parameters and what have you in there, it's really putting those things on the table and calling that and having the group start to put those parameters in place. Because the issue is when you come in and put those parameters in place, then it appears like you have an agenda. So if the elephant in the room is money and nothing seems to move on unless the dreaded money trail comes up, then that's something you're going to need to facilitate the group to solve before you move forward. Because if that's always sitting in the background, you're never going to move on to anything else until that's taken care of. Empowering the quieter members of the group to contribute. Well, you can, once again, at the beginning, as you set up your the values in the group, say, okay, we have some quieter members. How do you want to involve those members? You may ask those people. You may even prompt someone that comes up. You may have someone sitting next to someone who's quiet who knows them. You may even say, can you encourage the person to speak? Sometimes we have little activities where you have a discussion about something and the other person presents your ideas. They're just little kind of activities and games. And I may even just go by and say, Jane, what's your input? You've been very quiet and I can see that you're thinking about this deeply. What's your view on it? And give someone the table or give someone the floor to be able to express that. Facilitating virtual cross-team meetings and keeping people accountable. Well, the group needs to keep itself accountable. It's very, very difficult for the facilitator to do that. So once again, setting up the plan, finding out what the chain of command is, finding out what the level of commitment is, finding out who is accountable at a higher level, and they are the ones and the group, and putting in place how are you going to keep each other accountable. I've certainly finished a session saying, all right, we've got 3 different groups here. The next half hour is a session on how you're going to hold each other accountable for this, because it's a team that holds each other accountable. It's very, very difficult. And if you don't have a way of doing that, these teams then separate and never come together again, then you would have to ask yourself, why are we having a facilitator meeting in the first place? Someone needs to hold that group to account. How to deal with different and sometimes opposing ideas in a meeting. Well, I guess the most interesting and the most valuable meetings are when there are different and opposing ideas in that meeting. And it really then becomes, all right, you're managing the process to allow people to safely say what they have to say, to bring the contentious issues in there, and managing the process of where we agree, where we don't agree, and what information you're tabling there, and what can we agree on, and moving through that mediation process. So you start to become a mediator in there, not an owner of that information. But the different and opposing ideas in a meeting, they're the richest meetings, because they're the ones I tend to find at the end of it, because they're opposing ideas. The end result is the best combination of those 2 opposing ideas. keeping meetings on track, presenting subject matter neutrally so as not to offend anybody. Who should facilitate meetings? Well, as I say to you, keeping meeting on track is about all the things we've already spoken about. Pre-setting your agenda, pre-setting things up so that you are controlling that process. Who should facilitate the meeting? As I said to you before, you're looking for someone neutral to facilitate, especially if it's contentious, because it's a contentious person or the person who has no invested interest in the outcome that can call these contentious meetings and keep them on track. Someone has permission. The trouble with having a GM come in is it completely changes the dynamics of that group. Politics, all that kind of thing start to come into it. And if it's a meeting where you really need to drive some different results, then it's important that maybe you get someone outside to manage that. Record accurate minutes, handling objections, dealing with difficult colleagues and stakeholders. I think we've certainly spoken about that. I get people tend to write things down, or they write them on flip charts and whatever to bring that back together again. Ensuring that enthusiasm and energy for outcomes continues beyond the meeting. Once again, that's an activity that if it's a problem, then that's the problem the group would need to solve before you finish the session. Because if you have a meeting and people walk away and there's no commitment as to what they're going to do to keep that going, then it will die on the vine. Because as a facilitator, you can't be running around trying to generate that once the meeting's finished. Advise on facilitating meetings remotely. That's really quite challenging. I would say you wouldn't want a large group of people. I would say you would need to put a lot of information out prior to it. So do a lot of pre-planning, send a lot of reading material out, have everyone on board as to what all the issues are and what have you, and almost provide as much information as possible prior to having that meeting. And then when you're on, you get into that meeting, you're already even asking people's views and what have you on there. So when you go on the meeting, it's not a huge group, and you already, everyone pretty much knows what's going on. So you're moving into, action mode, conclusion mode, things like that, rather than trying to do all that during a meeting. Because if I was trying to present, take notes, break out into groups, record what's going on and what have you, if all that's going on remotely, it is probably too big of an ask, and you'll get a very, very surface, superficial response where you may want something a lot more meaningful and deeper than that. Okay, so I think that just about brings us to the end of our presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, I do really enjoy facilitating, and you get a lot of value out of it. I've never had a facilitated meeting where I didn't leave it feeling very energized myself with the contribution of the group, the excitement the group has, because a lot of a good facilitated meeting is people leaving it knowing they're going to achieve something great and different and new moving forward. So at that point, I will hand you back to our General Manager, Melinda.
Thanks, Peter. I hope everybody found that presentation valuable. Peter, Riri asks, when we have an individual in the group that's reluctant to join in activities and tend to ruin the activities, what can the facilitator do?
I tend to, if they're being disruptors or anything like that in the activities, first of all, I would have a conversation with them, but it's setting that any activity or anything like that is participation by choice. So I would never kind of set up an activity and say you have to join this facility, this activity. So the first thing I would do would have a conversation with that person and say, get some reason behind that. And if they don't want to be involved in it, I can't force that. I may table it with the group and say, Jane doesn't want to get involved in this activity, so she'll be observing that. I certainly don't want to make that individual feel bad about it, about themselves. I don't want to neutralise where their contribution may be in there, but it's not my job to make them want to be involved. If they don't want to be involved, then my goal is still the goals of the facilitated meeting. It's not that everyone has a great time. It's not that everybody loves me. It's not that everybody gets involved and they don't want to be involved. And the rest of the team will move on. And a lot of times I've found people that step out of that now start to feel like they're being isolated, and they will join the group later on. But sometimes people may even be doing that for, to draw attention to themselves and their cause. You can't let someone like that dominate. So I pretty much just push on. This is what we're doing. If you don't want to be involved in it, that's fine, but we're moving forward anyway.
Hope that answers your question, Riri. Thanks everybody for joining us. We do hold these, we do hold these events on a monthly basis. We usually hold them face-to-face. So, but obviously with the current COVID environment at the moment, we are continuing to run the webinars once a month, and our next one is values cascades and how that impacts your culture. So please join us for that one. That's on Thursday the 13th of August. We'll also be sending a copy of the presentation out to all of you today as well. So there doesn't appear to be any more questions, Peter.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. See you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.